Question number 3, Nuk Korako.
Te marangai te whare mauri ora.
Kia ora.
My question is to the Minister of Finance. What new government policies to support New Zealand families will take effect from July 1?
I hear this.
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, a strong economy and improving public finances are allowing the government to invest more in priority public services to ensure New Zealanders benefit from this country's progress. A number of measures take effect from tomorrow. Thousands of New Zealanders will benefit from the extra $124 million over 4 years invested into Farmac, which starts tomorrow. New Zealanders suffering from advanced melanoma will have access to the life-saving drug Opdivo, while people living with hepatitis C will have access to 2 new drugs which have a 90% cure rate. In addition, in the ACC area, the ACC motor vehicle levy will also reduce from tomorrow to around $130 annually. That's a $200 reduction since 2014-15.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Nuk Korako.
What changes to paid parental leave are coming into force from 1 July?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the maximum weekly rate of paid parental leave will increase from $516.85 to $527.72 per week. In addition, the government has recently extended paid parental leave from 14 to 18 weeks and increased eligibility, and parental leave in New Zealand is now slightly more than the OECD average. More workers are now eligible for parental leave payments. Eligible parents of preterm babies are entitled to a longer period of payments, and workers can take parental leave more flexibly if it works for them and their employer. And last year we increased the parental tax credit in working for families from $150 a week to $220 a week, and increased that entitlement from 8 weeks to 10 weeks.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Nuk Korako.
What other policies came into effect this year to support New Zealand families, particularly those living in hardship?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, Budget 2015 included a number of measures in a $790 million package of support for children living in hardship, and this came into force earlier this year. It included increased work expectations for parents on a benefit. Benefit rates for families with children rose by $25 a week after tax. This is the first time core benefit rates have increased apart from inflation since 1972. Extra support for low-income working families with the minimum family tax credit and the base rate of the in-work tax credit both increasing. And childcare assistance for low-income families increased, reducing barriers for parents moving off welfare and into work. That package targets around 160,000 families with 300,000 children with incomes of less than $36,350 a year.
Point of order, James Shaw.
Yeah, Mr Speaker, I seek leave of the House for the Minister to simply table his speech notes.
Order. No, this is order. I think the point that really is making is the answer was relatively long. I accept that, but it is question number 3. It is the first government question of the day. It is an issue that is important, at least to the government, and I took that into mind as I considered the length of the answer. Supplementary question, Nuk Korako.
Kia ora te mana whakawa. How is the government's economic program helping families by supporting more jobs, higher wages for New Zealanders?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, many members of the House will find this part quite important. On behalf of the Minister of Finance, one of the most important things we can do for vulnerable families is help parents into work. 200,000 jobs were created in the last 3 years in New Zealand, and a further 170,000 are expected by 2020. The average wage is expected to reach over $63,000 a year in that time. Statistics New Zealand yesterday provisionally revised the unemployment rate down to 5.2%, which compares exactly to 5.7% in Australia.
Order.
And New Zealand now has the 3rd highest employment rate in the OECD. Mr Speaker,
Order. Minister Ozima said, I have a point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My point of order is if the Minister
wants to cover 10 different matters in an answer, he should be asked 10 different supplementary questions. And my second point, sir, is at the start of that question, we had a couple of sentences where the Minister just gave irrelevancies in advance of his answer instead of answering the question, again lengthening the answer of his turgid prose.
Order. I'll hear from the Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, the subject of income distribution and wealth distribution has been discussed in this House this week.
This is a point of order and it will be heard in silence.
And I would argue that the information contained in those questions will be of interest not just to members of the House but to New Zealanders. And I think the government has a right, through the questions, to actually explain what it's doing to help on some of the issues of the day.
And I accept that point. As I mentioned earlier, it is question number 3. It is the first government question of the day, and I'm aware of a number of policies that come into effect on the 1st of July. As I mentioned yesterday, I am the sole determinant of the length of an answer. If it goes on for too long, I consider it's too long, then I will curtail the answer, and that's what I did yesterday on a number of occasions. That one, I had felt it was still giving information that I thought would have been important to members of this Parliament. If some members of Parliament don't find that information of relevance to them, then at least offer the courtesy of letting the others hear the answer. Question number 4, Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr.